London, prior to the start of World War II, and in the face of the hated Führer, Adolf Hitler knew that it needed new and quality leadership. William Manchester, author of the trilogy The Last Lion, The Life of Winston Spencer Churchill, is quoted as saying, "England's new leader, were he to prevail, would have to stand for everything England's decent, civilized establishment had rejected." They viewed Adolf Hitler as the product of complex social and historical forces. Their successor would have to be a passionate Manichaean who saw the world as a medieval struggle to the death between the powers of good and the powers of evil, who held that individuals are responsible for their actions and that the German dictator was therefore wicked. A believer in martial glory was required, one who saw splendor in the ancient parades of victorious legions through Persepolis, and could rally the nation to brave the coming of German fury. An embodiment of fading Victorian standards was wanted, a tribune for honor, loyalty, duty, and the supreme virtue of action. One who would never compromise with iniquity, who could create a sublime mood and thus give men heroic visions of what they were and might become. Like Adolf Hitler, he would have to be a leader of intuitive genius, a born demagogue in the original sense of the word, a believer in the supremacy of his race and his national destiny, an artist who knew how to gather the blazing light of history into his prism and then distort it to his ends, an embodiment of inflexible resolution who could impose his will and his imagination on his people, a great tragedian who understood the appeal of martyrdom and could tell his followers the worst, hurling it to them like great hunks of bleeding meat, persuading them that the year of Dunkirk would be the one in which it was equally good to live or to die, who could, if necessary, be just as cruel, just as cunning, and just as ruthless as Hitler, but who could win victories without enslaving populations or preaching supernaturalism, or foisting off myths of his infallibility, or destroying or even warping the libertarian institutions he had sworn to preserve. Such a man, if he existed, would be England's last chance. Fortunately, in London, there was such a man, and his name, again, was Winston Spencer Churchill. Born in London in 1874 to what would be considered a very privileged family, to parents who lived in favorable conditions, one would think that Winston Churchill would have had a favorable life. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Unloved and unliked by his parents, he had only his nanny to love him and to raise him. At the age of 7, he was unfortunately ripped from her care and placed into a boarding school. His parents didn't like him. His mother was quoted as saying that as a child she disliked her son until he was much, much older and had finally become interesting. His father despised Churchill and told him that the only thing that he would ever amount to is a minor career in the military. At the boarding school he was sent to, he was beaten severely by his headmaster, often whipped in the back, and assaulted by other children. He was a small, not strong boy. It was this treatment and that led him to change and eventually become the man that he is remembered as. Displayed from the beginning, one of the core values of being a great leader, Winston Churchill contained it. He contained so much determination it was ridiculous. Churchill knew what he wanted, and despite of the lack of support in his life, he never stopped trying. You can see that, according to this slide, that he attended Sandhurst Military Academy. He attempted 3 times to gain entrance into the academy, and it was only after the 3rd time that his essay was accepted. He was pretty successful in the military, and it wasn't until after he was under the command that commanded the defense at Antwerp that he ran into some trouble. He was sent back to the front line, but he still did not let that stop him. He did his best on the front line. He put his tanks into action and then went into trench warfare. Everything that is used as a border on this page describes who he was and what he stood for. After his military career, he went into politics, and he often used his military career after that to help him as a politician. His greatest goal was to become a prime minister, and you can see that he did that not once but twice. But when he started his political career, he was not so successful. He lost his first election to the House of Commons at age 24, but that did not stop him from trying again. He was elected 1 year later at the age of 25. After that time, he became Minister of the Crown, President of the Board of Trade. He was the youngest person appointed to the cabinet position. He held every cabinet position except Foreign Secretary. And then there was a period of time where he was not involved in politics, and it was said that during this time he was extremely depressed. Churchill liked power, in not such a way that he was maniacal or anything like that, but he wanted to be in charge and he wanted to see change, and he wasn't afraid to make that change happen. But when not in charge or not in power, he didn't know what to do with his life. So when 1940 rolled around, the beginning of World War II, in the midst of World War II, his job as prime minister led to great successes. After becoming prime minister, Winston Churchill was faced with a great decision. Adolf Hitler had proposed a peace offer, saying that we will end the war if certain negotiations were met. It is then said that the only reasonable course, the only decision a stable man of solid judgment could reach, was to come to terms with Hitler. Fortunately, Winston Churchill was not a reasonable man. It is said that he said, "I have thought carefully in these last days whether it was part of my duty to consider entering into negotiations with that man being Adolf Hitler. If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground." He spoke to the people, he spoke to the House, and then the English people, as no one had ever before or ever would again. He said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." Any other politician might have told them, "Our policy is to continue to struggle. All our forces and resources will be mobilized." And this is what Churchill said: "Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Winston Churchill was not all about fighting, but he knew what kind of man Adolf Hitler was, and he knew that any negotiations that they came to would not end up well. During the insatiable World War II, England, along with America, and even Russia, were faced with the great problem of Germany. Churchill, being a wise man, knew that he needed to find an allegiance with the three greatest powers: his own country, the United States of America, and again Russia. The fate of Eastern Europe rested with the dying man, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the sick man, Winston Spencer Churchill, and a psychotic man, Joseph Stalin, who was a little man with no conscience. They knew that what he wanted from Germany giving up was not the same as what they wanted. What Roosevelt and Churchill were looking for was for the war to end and for peace to happen. Stalin was looking for Russia to gain, for his country to become larger, and for them to gain from the war. Unfortunately, that's how it was. And unfortunately, these two men had to side with him in order to get Halo, or in order for the war to end. I think this really says something as to what a great leader is and what a great leader can do. Although they knew that Joseph Stalin was evil, and again had no conscience, they knew that this was the only way that their countries were going to be safe, that the rest of Europe was going to be safe. Sometimes they have to choose the lesser of the evils in order to be victorious. Winston Churchill died in 1965 at the age of 90 years old. He had had a severe stroke. He had spent many of the prior years sick, and up to the 4 months prior to his death, he did stay active in politics, active in the events of England. He knew what was best for his country, and he never gave up on him. When Churchill left the world, he left with a legacy. He might have been a boy born into unfavorable conditions, with parents that did not love him. He might have been weak. He might have been small. But through determination, he grew to be what I myself would consider to be one of the greatest leaders of all time. Thank you for listening to my presentation.